Noah's Ark, the global flood, did not happen. It's not true, except that it's still 100% true. I'll explain. Hi, my name is Jeremy. I am a deeply skeptical person, also a pastor. Okay, so when a flood happens, you can see it. Archaeologists, geologists can see it actually in the dirt. So especially the further you get back in history, like before you have kiln-fired bricks, you have these destruction layers, right? Each of they call them strata, and like each, when they rebuild their house, they like knock their house down, they put sand on top of it, they build up another thing. And so you have these like layers of bricks, of like destruction layers, like where you see each era of a town. And then if there's a flood, it actually is just nothing. There's a whole layer of mud, dirt, sand, because when a flood happens and you don't kiln fire your bricks, those bricks just turn back into mud. And so you'll have brick rubble, another layer of brick rubble, another layer of brick rubble, and then just like bleh, and then another layer of brick rubble, and you're like, oh, hey, look, there's the flood. You can look at it. You can see it. And similarly, when geologists look at places that weren't occupied, they have other similar kind of signs that floods happen. So if there was a global flood, you would expect that you would see that kind of stuff in lots of different places, right? They can date those things. They find coins in some of the layers and they know about when it is. And you would think that somewhere all over the earth, every archaeological dig that they did, they would find evidence of a flood around the same time. But that's not the only kind of records you would have of something that is a global event. You would actually find stories about floods that happened in cultures and were preserved in cultures that were in places where floods didn't happen. Mountainous places and desert places, you would have a story of this flood. But we have none of them. We don't have the archaeological evidence, we don't have the geological evidence, we don't have the stories. And so you would expect to see those kind of things. So there's no way it happened. There is no way there was a global flood. And now, I don't have to get into it. It's not really hard to understand. Modern science will be really clear in telling you that you need way more than 2 animals of every species to ensure biodiversity. That's not possible. And the size of the ark, not possible to get all of the animals on. It just didn't happen, okay? So that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, actually. Right? A culture telling a story of a global flood. There's actually a lot of these stories. You find these stories in places where flooding happens, obviously, because in the ancient world where they don't have science to tell them and explain things, it just feels like God's doing this stuff. And so they tell stories about it. But it didn't actually happen. The whole earth was not covered with water. So what that means is that the story of Noah, the global flood, is 100% not true. Didn't happen. Except that you remember I said at the beginning that it's also 100% true. That's because there's more than one way that something can be true. Because you see, that story, it's not really about whether or not God has the ability to release enough water on the earth to cover the surface area of the earth to actually flood the whole earth, and whether or not a boat is big enough to blah, blah, blah. That's not the point of that story. The point of that story is way bigger. So in the ancient world, this idea was around that the gods were angry. Like, they were really angry, and they were angry all the time. They were always trying to kill people. And this is a story like that, right? God gets really angry at everybody, and God decides to kill everybody. God in this story is like a genocidal maniac. All kinds of problems with this story in the ethics of all of this, in a modern sense, right? The modern ethical frameworks that we have. God does not look good in this story. But in the ancient world, this story stood out as something different because of the way the story ends. Because you remember the end of the story, right? The end of the story is God makes a covenant with humanity, and he says that God will not ever destroy the earth again like that. And then there's a sign of the covenant. The sign of the covenant is a rainbow, which is this sort of divine symbol of divine warfare, like a bow and arrow kind of bow, hanging in the sky, a giant one, a God-sized one, right? And that symbol says that God has put God's bow up. God is not at war with humanity, which is a big distinction. It's saying that God isn't always angry with everybody. God isn't going to be a genocidal maniac. God is going to be different in that God has now made a covenant, an agreement between God and humanity. And that covenant is to make the world a better, less violent, more safe place. And that is true. That is a distinction in the ancient world. And hopefully it's a distinction in your own personal life and experience. And it actually calls you not to be a horrible person, not to be an angry person that is always fighting and causing destruction and evil and is like ruining everybody's life. It means that if you're trying to follow God, which you might not be trying to follow God, and I get that, but it means that if you're trying to follow God, you shouldn't like tell everybody they're going to hell in the comments of this video and tell me how I'm a horrible pastor for not believing the Bible. Just saying. But either way, the point is that the violence and all of that is antithetical to what God is trying to accomplish in the world, what God is trying to accomplish with humanity in the world. So, in other words, the story is completely false and 100% true.